Good morning. Well, it is where I'm at. Welcome. If it's your first time here, what we're doing is going over how I built a Squaredrop for my family to use. And today we're going to go over how I built the floor. If you have any questions about how any of it was done, feel free to just comment below. I'll try to get to everything that I see. I hope this video helps somebody maybe build their own, because we've certainly enjoyed ours. If you do like it, you want to feel like you should subscribe or hit that like button, I'd certainly appreciate it. It'd give me a little boost to just keep going with this. It's been pretty fun, a little different so far, but hopefully it's helping somebody. And thanks for watching. Okay, so right off the bat, my plans had to change due to the price of lumber. I was going to use ACX fir plywood, and it was just ridiculously expensive at the time. So we're going to use cheaper plywoods, lots of resin, and build a conventional frame. So right here, we're just milling down some 2x4s that I went through and selected the best I can find, milling them down to 3 inches, and we will build a frame around the trailer that we're going to sandwich between some 1/2 inch ply and 1/4 inch ply, and then filled inside with polyester resin and foam for strength and insulation. The original plan for protecting the underside of the flooring was to fiberglass it using epoxy resin and some chop strand material. In the end, I basically just bathed all of the plywood in epoxy resin, letting it soak in, thinning it out, and doing multiple layers of that. I didn't use chop strand on the bottom, again, because of cost, but I used 3 layers of the epoxy resin and then some marine topside paint. And then later on, after a lot more of the trailer's built, I'll raise it back up, and we will use fiberglass matting around the edges and fold it over onto the bottom. As for building this frame, pretty simple construction, using pocket holes and lots of tight bond too. I know it's got a red label on the bottle, but that's just an old bottle. Today's got a little more on the trailer. I was waiting on plywood, and it's just ridiculously expensive. 3/4 fir ACX plywood is $140 a sheet. So I went ahead and changed plans, and I'm gonna make a structure for the floor and then probably use some oak just from Lowe's. Still expensive, but cheaper for the walls and the rest. But right now, just working on the flooring.
Went ahead and just 2x4s, trimmed them down 3 inch, and then building a structure. And finally making a little progress.
One philosophy I have on building is treating each step like that's the showpiece everyone's going to be looking at. And it might add a little bit of time, but it's really not a lot of extra work, and it only makes the final product that much better. So now we've got the 2x4 frame sanded down and ready to cover with the 1/4 inch plywood. This is the underside, and we cover everything with construction adhesive. And then I think it took me 3 pieces to cover the bottom of the trailer. I cut each piece of plywood to a width where it crossed the center of a 2x4 bracing, and then left it proud on the edges that we just cleaned those up with a flush router bit. And this is where we're starting day 3. Well, 3, I've had to take the kids a bunch of places, so I get a few hours of time to work on it. But day 3 of the floor. So in the original video, I was just repeating myself again, but this is a good opportunity to talk about what we're gonna do with this floor. So obviously it's flipped over from when we put that 1/4 inch on, and now we're looking at it the way it will sit on the trailer. Inside of each of those sections between the 2x4s, I'm gonna fill with a polyester resin. It's a lot cheaper than the epoxy resin, and it hardens up once it's closed up from the air. So we'll put that all across the bottom to give it strength, and then we'll cover it with some of the purple foam from Lowe's or Home Depot. It'll take 2 layers of that I'm gonna have to sand down flush to fit, and then we'll cover it in a piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and then build up the top from there. Those jack stands sure made it easy. Raising it up and lowering it based off what I need to do was great. So remember I said I caused myself problems? Well, here we're going to build with those problems in mind. So I put too much heat in the metal and it bowed. Well, I don't want to build the trailer square and flush and level and then try to snug it down on that bowed trailer. I want to build that bow into my box so there's no movement, no vibrations, and everything fits tight to the way it's actually built. So what we're doing here is clamping that floor down and forcing that bow to match the trailer. Then I'm cutting the holes for all the mounting points, all 12 of them, and I'm gonna bolt it down snug and tight to hold that bow in. Then when we come across with that polyester resin in all those crevices and it hardens, it's going to help hold that bow. And then you add on top of it, putting that 1/2-inch plywood that's gonna be glued and screwed to the frame. Well, then again, reinforce that bow to fit the trailer. Then down the road, when I have to build the walls going laterally forward and aft on the trailer, I'm gonna have to cut that bow into it. Like I said, I create my own problems. And this is the end of that polyester resin going in. You just use MEK to set it. It's Bondo brand from AutoZone, and it's great for this type of application. And now it's time to put the 2 layers of insulation in, a 1/2 inch and a 1 inch, because they didn't have an 1.5 inch at my local store. Now we cut to both layers are in, and you notice it looks pretty smooth and flush. I used a rasp to get rid of the foam and bring it down to the layer of the wood. Now it's time to put on that 1/2 inch plywood. I had to cut the piece at a width that would fit in between the fenders, but again, I'm leaving it fairly proud so that we can clean it up with a flush trim bit later on. But remember I said that I want to build that bow into it, so I'm not completely unbolting that flooring. I'm doing it in each section, so I had to figure out where the holes were for that 1/2 inch plywood on the top, drill them, and then come back. So it's a little bit of back and forth to keep that bow in, create my own problems. But basically I used that tight bond to glue on all the wood joints and then wound up, not screwing it, but pinning it with a brad nailer and then covering it with everything heavy that I could find to, again, hold that bow in and get a good bond with the glue. And the story continues for the next 2 pieces. Now we just flush it up where we can with that flush trim router bit. Notice it's still bolted down. I'm giving that epoxy in there and the glue plenty of time to set so that we can hold that bow in. And again, take each step like it's the final product. Take the time to sand it, make it nice and smooth. Even though this is the floor and it's mostly going to be covered up, I find that if I build that way, it tends to work out a little bit better. Okay, so this is the first time I'm revealing the kind of theme of the trailer. Not quite Shaoshuiban, or if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm gonna burn the wood and it burns all the softwood. So once again, the floor is gonna be mostly covered, but I thought it would look cool as kind of the flooring rather than putting some tile or something in. So just using a propane torch and using a little bit of stainless steel sheet to protect the inside of my fender around those areas, and burning it in a uniform pattern. And after it's burned and slightly sanded and wiped down, I'm covering everything in a spar urethane, and I think I put 3 coats on. So now it's the final prep before we flip that floor over to work on the underside. Just finishing the bolt holes so that the bolts are recessed under that 1/2 inch material, and then using the router to flush up the edges of that top side once I slide the floor forward after breaking it free. So now we have the floor flipped over. The actual trailer is over at my dad's house, taking up his driveway. So here again, we're taking the time to sand the floor down and make it look like this is the showpiece. From here, we're gonna be covering it with that epoxy resin. Now, of course, it's YouTube, so it's Total Boat, right? But anyway, that's epoxy resin. So this is more of a final finish topside resin than that polyester that's on the inside. So I'll flood in 3 coats of this resin. I tried to use a black pigment that didn't really work out. So this is when I decided I'm gonna be covering it with the paint rather than chop strand anyways. So the edges, the tops, everything gets 3 flooded coats. The first layers are kind of thinned out, and then just building it up for that water protection and the strength. Again, this is helping set that bow. And here we're adding more layers of that epoxy resin to the edge. And I did want a black pigment to kind of be under any paint that might scratch off. So I took a play out of Peter Brown's book and used charcoal, ground up charcoal, put it in the epoxy. And it worked pretty well on the edges. It gave me kind of like a subcolor below the paint. And now it's time for that marine topside paint. So we wipe everything down with acetone first so it adheres well and start painting. In the end, I believe this was 3 coats as well. It's time to flip it back over, and everything just keeps getting heavier. So I enlisted the help of a neighbor who was more than gracious to help come flip it over and help me get it back on the trailer. So if you made it this far, I'd like to take a second just say thank you. I really appreciate it. If you feel the need to like or subscribe, I certainly appreciate that as well. But again, I want to say if there's any questions you might have that you think, hey, this random guy might be able to help, or I could go over something a little bit deeper that I have in this video, or maybe perhaps one of the others, just comment below. I will do what I can to provide an answer. Hopefully I'll help somebody. That's the goal. I'd certainly appreciate that. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one, where we finally start building the walls to this family camper. So hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks again. All right, the floor is done. Gotta move some stuff. But spar everything on the top. We have epoxy on the bottom. And that finish is kind of gonna be on the outside as well. But floor and trailer, pretty much done. Got some new tires, finally, other than the old 65 truck tires. But now it's time for the walls.